How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Ganji. Welcome to another episode of Tear Talk. So we're going to go back and revisit the Anna Kepner case, but this time we're going to talk about policy, procedures. I'm very familiar with that, by the way, because, I'm in a position where we always look at policies and procedures, sometimes reactionary, sadly, but sometimes in an effort to be preventive. I think this could be a mixture of both. Sometimes when you have a concern and it pushes liability, you tend to overreact a little bit. And then you tend to realize what is within your realm to manage. And sadly, what isn't. I think with the cruise ships, you're looking at public stuff that they really do focus on, like stuff that may happen by the pool, in bars and clubs that they have there. But stuff that happens inside the cabin may be a little bit more harder to manage. But with that said, that can always defer that level of responsibility to the caretakers. So granted, when you see the comments on what we've done so far, there's a push going both ways, but a greater push is moving towards the family, because I think a lot of people are aware of the fact that what's in that cabin, who is in that cabin, what happens in that cabin, that's really, a lot of that is under parental or some level of guardianship supervision. So we have a lot to cover today. Then I have a few questions along the way that I want to toss to us as a community so we can build from the discussion. So this way it's something that we're learning together. I thought that'd be pretty cool. So I have a couple of questions. I may have a guest to come back on and discuss this, but I want to just kind of go over this with us at first. So this is pretty much going to be a little bit of a deep dive here. So we spent considerable time covering the Anna Kepner case. So that's the shocking details of an 18-year-old death aboard a Carnival cruise, and then the involvement of a 16-year-old stepbrother. Now, the question about what happened in that cabin during what should have been a family vacation right now is extremely relevant. So this is Anna Kepner. So tonight I want to shift our focus a bit, I'm looking at the comments. I'm seeing that this is another set of concerns that are coming up. So tonight I want to ask a different, arguably more uncomfortable question, one that goes beyond the criminal investigation into something systemic. Could Carnival policies have done anything to prevent Anna's death? What's your thoughts? And then immediately alongside that question comes another crucial consideration. How much can we realistically expect a cruise line to know about the private dynamics of a family? That's a very interesting question. That's something we're still trying to figure out. Because here's the tension we need to acknowledge up front. Carnival Corporation isn't a mind reader. They're not social workers conducting home studies. They can't see into someone's house and know that there's been tension, allegations, or concerning behavior between step-siblings. They can't rewrite family history, and they can't control every decision a parent makes about their children. But here's what they can control: their policies, their procedures, their booking systems, their staff training, and the safety protocols they build into every voyage. So the real question becomes, are those systems designed in a way that could catch warning signs, that could offer options, that could give young people a way out if they feel unsafe? Or are they designed purely for operational efficiency, making sure everyone has a cabin assignment, making sure minors have adult supervision in public areas, but not really thinking deeply about what happens inside those cabins behind closed doors? So tonight on this show, I thought we could examine what Carnival's current policies actually prioritize when it comes to minors, from what I reviewed, where there appears to be gaps, particularly around cabin assignments and mixed gender teens in blended families. What changes could be made that balance family autonomy with enhanced safety? And critically, how cruise lines can ensure that whatever policies exist aren't just words on paper, but are actually followed by crew members in real-time situations. Now, guys, I'm not an expert here. I'm just doing some research. Maybe one day I can try to get a guest as the show becomes more popular. I can go ahead and get guests that may have a better knowledge of this, can take the lead in this dialogue. But in the meantime, this is very research driven. And stand by for a second. Let me get my glasses. I am over 40, and we have a lot of notes to go over. So stand by. I'm back. I want to be very clear about what this conversation is and what it isn't. So this is not an attack on Carnival specifically or on cruising in general, because millions of families cruise safely every year. Most blended families navigate vacations without incident. The overwhelming majority of teenagers share cabins with siblings or step siblings, and everyone is perfectly fine. But Anna Kepner is dead. There she is. And when an 18-year-old ends up murdered in a cabin she's shared with 2 teenage stepbrothers, we have an obligation to ask whether the systems in place did everything they reasonably could to prevent this tragedy. That's what is the biggest concern that's come through my channel right now. So not in hindsight, not with information, only investigators know that. And then that's what they actively trying to figure out and piece together right now. But I'm talking about structurally. Are the systems themselves designed to catch these situations? Because if they're not, then Carnival and frankly the entire cruise industry needs to rethink their approach to minor safety in a world where blended families are increasingly common, where family dynamics are complex, and where not every home is safe. So let's start at the beginning. Let's talk about what we know, what we don't know, and why that distinction matters when we're evaluating policy. Okay, guys, remember, this is a dialogue for us to build together. So I'll read a little, I'll toss some questions out to the audience, and I would love to see the conversations grow, because I see actively in my community, which I love, I'm getting some engagement finally. This is great, that people don't want to just ask questions. They want to discover answers. That's why they're asking these great questions. So I figure, why not try to build a community where we're all working together, answering questions, maybe creating new ones, and then keep the dialogue going, stay connected, because justice for Celeste, justice for Anna, justice for Jacqueline Mimi Torres Garcia, justice for anything that we cover, there's really no time frame. You got to realize the news will eventually move forward. They'll do the next topic, and we have to remain here, because at the end of the day, we have to know that there's closure, that we have justice. Justice should encompass 3 things: accountability, rehabilitation. Yes, I'm in the correction system. There is rehabilitation involved in that, and then obviously healing for the victim. But you need all 3. And sometimes people run with the next story, when in the end, the story is not done. And then what they do is they create small little things so they can maybe keep the views and clicks alive, and then that becomes more complex. It's like, hey, that thing's really small. We don't want to toss it. Oh, but it's going to get views. Yeah, but it's also going to confuse. And sometimes what's best is maybe there are concerns that can be addressed in the meantime, like this. This is a good concern to visit. And as I said, it's brought up through the community, so why not revisit it? And guys, if you do like what I provide, please, I do have Buy Me a Cup of Coffee. It's in the description as well as on top of my YouTube channel. Okay, so before we have an honest conversation about what Carnival could or should have done differently, we need to establish the factual foundation of this case. And just as importantly, we need to acknowledge what we don't yet know. So this is what's been confirmed publicly. In February of 2025, let me see, hold on. That's not right. So wait, I don't know why I put February. I'm reading it wrong. In November of 2025, Anna Kepner, who was 18 years old, boarded a Carnival cruise ship with her blended family. And according to booking records and family accounts, Anna was assigned to share a cabin with her 2 teenage stepbrothers. One was 16 and one was 14. Stepbrothers, the 14-year-old is still confusing to me, but the main concern, as I mentioned, is the 16-year-old. That's the key. And at some point during the voyage, Anna's body was discovered in that cabin. So that may have been November 7th in the morning, 11:17 a.m. Again, it's just a horrible situation. The medical examiner ruled her death right now as a homicide. We got the asphyxiation. That's the latest update. Looks like someone may have choked her out. People even saying that her head could even been pressed against the pillow because there's saliva and blood on the pillow, but that hasn't been confirmed. All we know that's been confirmed is the asphyxiation. It looks like was a reverse, maybe like an arm bar hold, like a reverse naked choke. Following the investigation, the 16-year-old's stepbrother was hospitalized, and right now we don't have the charges yet, but right now I believe he's staying at a relative's house. He's not at the same house as where the other siblings are. Okay, so that's pretty much undisputed facts. Now, here's what we don't know, and this matters tremendously for our policy discussion. We don't know what information the family provided to Carnival when they booked this cruise, because there seems to be a little bit of a family history here. So did they disclose that this was a blended family? Did they mention that these were step siblings rather than biological siblings? Were there any notes or special requests in the reservation system? Now, again, are we overreacting at first? Let's overreact at first, and then we'll bring it back. I mean, is this really necessary? You know what? May not be, or maybe now thinking about it, maybe it could be. So I rather go too far and pull back than not go far enough. But these could be good questions that could have been asked. But I don't think the Carnival goes that far. I mean, who would at that point? But times have changed. But it's just good questions to ask. Or did they simply book it like millions of other family book cruises, entering names, ages, payment information, and moving through the automated process without any deeper questions being asked? So we don't know if there were documented concerns about the relationship between Anna and her stepbrother before the cruise. There have been many reports suggesting Anna may have felt uncomfortable around one of the stepbrothers. There have been suggestions of prior incidences, but we don't know the full extent of what family members knew, what they may have minimized, or what they genuinely believe was safe. And this is a big concern in the community right now, because they are shifting responsibility, not to the cruise line, they're shifting responsibility to the family. So we don't know if Anna ever expressed discomfort or fear to anyone during the cruise. We only know what's being told to us. And some people are saying that did happen, but we don't know if that's confirmed. And sadly, we may never know, because the only person that could tell us would be her. Did Anna try to talk to a crew member? Did she mention anything to guest services? Did she seek help and not receive it? Or did she, like so many young people in uncomfortable family situations, stay silent because she didn't know where to go or didn't think anyone would take her seriously? And we don't know if any Carnival crew members observed or were informed about any concerning dynamics in that cabin before Anna's death. Remember, that's a question about liability. Because, if there was a history and that wasn't brought up, that's, of course, one thing. But if there were concerns in the moment and they brought it to someone's attention and nothing happened, then that pushes on a little bit towards the cruise line. But we have no reason to believe that latter part happened. Were there any noise complaints, signs of distress, anything that should have triggered a welfare check or intervention? These unknowns are critical because they define the scope of what we can fairly critique. I mean, the big thing is when she felt sick the day before on the 6th and she left, there should have been a checkup on her from at least her family. And I don't think that happened, or at least not what we're told, but who knows? Maybe there was a phone call. We don't know. But I don't think anybody checked the cabin for obvious reasons. If Carnival received no information suggesting risk and no one aboard the ship reported concerns, then we're not talking about failure to act on known warning signs. We're talking about whether their systems are designed to even identify warning signs in the first place. And that's a different but equally important conversation. So again, you get negligent if you fail to react properly, but we may not have that here. It's just more of maybe there's other measures in play now that could prevent this. So the core policy question is, so here's what I thought we could focus on. Regardless of what Carnival knew or didn't know in Anna's specific case, are their policies structured in ways that could catch these situations generally? Are there checkpoints in the booking process? Are there protocols for cabin assignment involving mixed gender teens? Are there clear pathways for young people who feel unsafe? Are staff trained to recognize and respond to signs of distress in minors? Because if the answers to these questions is no and not really, then Anna's death, regardless of the specific circumstances, could expose a systemic gap that needs to be addressed, not just for one family, but for every family that boards a cruise ship with complicated dynamics that don't show up on a reservation form. So granted, I mean, when you come to overreacting at first to manage these concerns, there's a level of micromanagement and going too far and maybe eliminating discretion or choice from families, but you start there first and then you pull back. So maybe I'm asking too much, or we're looking at too much, or maybe not, because there's a lot of people here that believe that they should never been housed together. And if there's a common belief about that, then maybe there's something in policy if there's an agreement towards that. But with that said, the cruise line also has to be wary that they only have so much control of what happens in that private cabin. I mean, their main focus is on public areas, but I mean, they do have some control in those private areas, but there's a lot of that there where they can say, hey, you know what? That was up to the family to do. That really is not up to us because that's behind closed doors. But we took care of the stuff that was more public and in the open. So the first question I wanted to toss to us as a group is, when you look at a case like Anna, where the full picture only becomes clear after tragedy has occurred, how important is it to separate what a company realistically could have known at the time from what we can only see in hindsight? And how do we use that distinction constructively to build better systems rather than just assign blame after the fact? And I think a key part of that is basically understanding when there's that shift of responsibility. Because again, if this goes in court, you could have the family pushing on Carnival to do more, but Carnival may be like, wait a second, that's behind a closed door with a family dynamic that we know nothing about. So when you have two areas pushing blame, it's sad, but that's when the courts may have to come in and make a decision as to, who really has to take onus. And most likely, maybe it is a partnership onus or level of responsibility. But in the meantime, you have to be reasonable. Carnival, they are responsible for what goes on there, of course, but that doesn't alleviate the responsibility from the families to make sure everything's correct to minimize concerns. So when you dig into Carnival's published policy for minors, and I spent a few moments doing this, a little bit some time last night, this morning, a clear pattern emerges in terms of what the company focuses on and what seems to receive less attention. And again, we're here now to see if we could create anything that matters. Again, and sometimes in these creations, this is where her legacy carries out. So no one ever truly dies in vain. And that's the goal here, right? A voice for the voiceless, a voice for the vulnerable. So instead of chasing some superficial headline, let's really take time and revisit it and see what can be done, because justice is about closure, right? And it's more about, again, just holding people accountable. As I said, it's also about preventing. So let's talk about age and supervision requirements, because this has come across on my comments a lot. So Carnival has explicit rules. Anyone under 21 must travel with a parent, guardian, or relative who is at least 25 years old. That adult is responsible for the minor's behaviors and well-being throughout the cruise. Teenagers age 14 to 17 can be booked into their own cabin, but it must be within 3 rooms of the guardian cabin, and the reservations must be linked in the system. I saw that. There's structure there, and there's accountability. So I was originally told that there has to be an adult in that room, and that's not the case. I read here that teenagers age 14 to 17 can be booked into their own cabin, but it must be within 3 rooms of their guardian cabin, and the reservations must be linked in the system. So they also may recognize maybe the importance of boundaries at certain age groups, especially in this case here, maybe the boundary of a 18-year-old young woman. I also saw, I got 2 notes here. Again, I'm learning with you guys. So it says, Carnival requires guests to be 21 years old to sail independently. Anyone 20 or younger must travel with a relative or guardian who is at least 25 years old. That adult is responsible for the minor's behavior, safety, and compliance with all ship rules for the entire cruise. So they do put some ownership on the guardianship. That's why it's got to be 25, not 18. And Carnival defines guardian broadly. It doesn't say it has to be a legal guardian. It just says guardian. Carnival separates minors into 2 specific age groups with different cabin requirements. Age 14 and under must be booked in the same cabin as the 25-plus guardian or in connecting cabins, and they cannot be placed alone in a separate stateroom. Ages 15 to 17 may be booked in their own cabin, but it must be located no more than 3 staterooms away from the guardian's cabin. Okay, so it's 15 to 17. All right, and then so 14 and under, you must be in the same room as the guardian that's 25 plus. So it's 15 to 17, not 14 to 17. Sorry, guys. And the reservation must be linked so Carnival can verify adult oversight. And these rules are designed to ensure minors remain within easy reach of their responsible adult at all time, and that staff can quickly confirm who's supervising them. Okay, so a slight adjustment, but most of it was correct. All right, there's structure there. Okay, there's accountability. Now, curfews in public spaces. Carnival enforces a 1 a.m. curfew for anyone 17 and under unless they're accompanied by an adult from their party or participating in a supervised youth program. If security finds unaccompanied minors wandering the ship late at night, they intervene. Then you got the public behavior and conduct. Carnivals have fun, be safe. Code of conduct gives the cruise line broad authority to address disruptive behavior. They can confine guests to cabins, impose fines, remove people from the ship at the next port or ban them from future cruises if their actions threaten the safety or comfort of others. Throughout public areas of the ship, there are surveillance cameras, there are security patrols, and there are staff watching for intoxication, fights, harassment, or anything that could create liability. On paper, this all sounds pretty comprehensive. Carnival is thinking about supervision, they're thinking about curfews, they're thinking about behavior management, and they're trying to create safe environments. Hey, for the curfew, I want to add one more caveat here. The adult must be part of their traveling party and be 21 or older, not just an adult generically. So it has to be someone that's connected to the party. Should have made that clear. And the policy says must be clear of all public areas by 1 a.m. for those under 18 unaccompanied. It doesn't phrase it exactly as curfew for anyone 17 and under, unless accompanied by an adult or in a supervised youth program, although that's effectively what it means. So it says basically policy says must be clear of all public areas by 1 a.m. for those 18 and under. So I read it the same way, just I stated it differently. Remember, I'm learning with you guys, and it's for public areas of the ship, not necessarily every internal path or restricted zone, but all public areas. So I guess in short, guests 17 years of age and under who are not accompanied by an adult in their traveling party age 21 or older must be clear of all public areas by 1 a.m. ship's time, unless they're participating in a supervised youth or teen program. Sorry about that, guys. I'm learning with you guys, and as I read it, I just check it out. So, but now here's some gaps. What Carnival policies don't seem to address. There's no publicly available policy that addresses who shares a cabin with whom, particularly when it comes to mixed gender teenagers, step siblings versus biological siblings, recently blended families where kids may not have grown up together, age differences between minors sharing the same small space. And technically, before this, why should there be? That seems to be something that should be managed by the families. But I have to ask the question, and again, not an effort to really overreact, but to really see if there's something that we have to just look at and then draw back from. Because would this truly be something that you would want to take on as liability for the cruise ship? I don't think so. This is something that's easily deferred back to the family unit, because you're already kind of putting structure in to give them some level of responsibility, and then they have to comply with that structure, the family. And if they don't comply with it, well, that's on the guardianship. So the booking system appears to operate on a simple algorithm. Are these people part of the same reservation? Is there any adult 25 plus in a nearby cabin? And if yes, green light, you book the cabin. All right, so that's what I get for the most part. The system doesn't ask, but should these specific people be in a room together? So it's not asking that question. So no mechanisms for families to disclose concerns. So now, if this does become a concern, and we want to look on the preventive side, is there anything when the family does booking that they could put this in as a concern? You know, again, that introduces liability back to the cruise line, so they may not be willing to do this. But, you know, it doesn't hurt to look at it. And I think we discussed this on the last show. But again, this introduces liability back to them, because right now it's safe for them. So when they review policies and procedures, you know, they're going to have the lawyers say, hey, wait, whoa. We don't want to introduce that, because that puts a lot of stuff that we can't control into our hands. And then that policy becomes something that, you know, if the family did something wrong, they can now push back and say, hey, but your policy is supposed to protect us, and kind of takes that responsibility away from the family. So as far as I can determine from public-facing material, there's no place in the booking or check-in process where a parent or even a young adult like Anna could say, hey, I have some concerns about this cabin arrangement. Can we talk about alternatives? There's no checkbox, no optional field, no invitation to flag potential issues. The assumption seems to be if the family booked it this way, it must be fine. It's hard to argue. It's hard to argue, because if they start questioning too much, then the liability starts to shift. And what about if there isn't a concern, and then based on this, the cruise line decides to make a shift, and then it does become a concern. And then now that's on the boat, the cruise, the ship. Carnival's, okay, so limited protocols for what happens inside cabins. So Carnival policies are robust when it comes to public spaces, hallways, restaurants, pools, clubs, theaters. Those are areas where crews can observe cameras. Those are areas where crews can observe, cameras can record, and intervention is straightforward. But what about what happens behind a cabin door? There are no cameras there, nor should there be. That's private space. It also means it's essentially a blind spot where interpersonal risk can escalate without anyone noticing until it's too late. The young person feels unsafe in their cabin. What are they supposed to do? Who do they tell? What happens next? Those questions don't have clear, polished answers. So then you have the pattern. You got the public order versus the private safety. I think that's kind of what you want to look at now. So if I was at the table and I'm looking at policy, it's like, okay, now we have to try to see what two areas we're looking at address. So we have public, which we seem to put a lot of our efforts to because it's out in the open. And then you got the private safety. So here's the pattern. This is what I saw. Carnival policies are designed to manage public order, to prevent chaos, liability, and visible problems in shared spaces. But they're not as clearly designed to address private interpersonal risk, particularly the kind that happens within families behind closed doors, where warning signs might be subtle or hidden. And that makes sense from an operational standpoint. Cruise lines aren't family therapists. They're not equipped to investigate every family's dynamic, and they serve millions of passengers annually, and the vast majority have perfectly safe experiences. But when that approach fails, the consequences can be catastrophic, as we see here. So this is good because that's why in the comments we see a lot of people not attacking the cruise line. They're attacking the family because I think a lot of people know that the responsibility at that point for her safety and what happened really dealt with how they were situated in those cabins. And they were quick to say that she should have given her private room or some way or housed differently than how she was. So there's a question I want to pose out to you guys. From a child safety or family dynamics perspective, does it concern you that so much emphasis in these policies is placed on managing behavior in public areas, curfews, surveillance, security patrols, while there seems to be much less infrastructure for identifying and responding to risk inside the cabin itself? And if so, what would be a more balanced approach look like? You know, obviously, the cruise ship has to be extremely careful. They can't just start going into people's privacy. No different as if you rented an apartment. You know, the owner, signs over ownership to some extent to the people that rent it, and they take control of kind of what happens there privately. So I would say it's no different here, but you can't get to a point where you're trying to get the cruise ship to start getting involved in the private lives. And I think we knew that, or we know that, we respect that. So that's why our big argument right now is really towards the families. So that brings us to the next part. So what happens when you have mixed gender teenagers, especially step siblings, sharing a cabin? And where's the line between respecting family autonomy and ensuring everyone is safe and comfortable? So this is where the policy you see between privacy and protection collide. So now let's talk about mixed gender cabins and blended families, kind of navigating this gray area. This is kind of a bit more of our focus today. All right, so let's start by acknowledging something really important. There's absolutely nothing inherently wrong or dangerous about opposite sex siblings sharing a cabin. That was kind of a debate back and forth. I know we talked about the stepbrother aspect, but I'm sure there's many people that have done this that really isn't a major concern. I don't want to piggyback from what I said yesterday, because I do believe when you have a young girl like this who's turned 18, as a father, I just would try to get her own room or try to do something where they even said maybe she could be with the stepmother and he'd be with the boys. I that would just be me being protective. I want to make sure I'm not knocking on people who do it the other way, because I'm learning as we go. But I think realistically, I think it would be better if, again, I meant to say step siblings. If they're step siblings, I think she should have had her own room. So I don't want to. I'm going to stick with that. Actually, again, I'm learning as we go, but I think I'm going to stick with that. I think that she should have had her own room, just as a protective father. I mean, there could be some comfortability, but in the end, she's an 18-year-old girl. I don't think she should be with minimal 16-year-old stepbrother. So there's absolutely, again, but just in case, because there's many people here that may disagree, maybe it's just a personal opinion. I'm not here casting judgment. We're just trying to look at things differently. So please don't get offended by the material, because in the end, we're learning, and now that this incident happened, it should cause us good reason to look back and maybe look at ourselves and look at what we do. So millions of families have sons and daughters who share bedrooms at home, who shared hotel rooms on vacations, who bunked together on road trips without any issue whatsoever. For the vast majority of families, mixed gender siblings, rooming is completely normal, perfectly safe, and not worth a second thought. So I want to be very clear. I'm not suggesting that opposite sex siblings shouldn't share cabins or that cruise lines should create blanket bans. That would be overreach. That would punish countless families who are doing just fine. And it would send a message that there's something inherently inappropriate about brothers and sisters being in the same space, which is absurd. But Anna Kepner's case asks us to consider different scenarios when mixed gender rooming becomes a gray area. Anna wasn't sharing a cabin with the brothers she grew up with from childhood. She was sharing a cabin with two teenage stepbrothers, young men who came into her life through her parents' remarriage. According to reports, this was a blended family. These were not lifelong siblings who had spent years establishing boundaries, norms, and a sense of safety for each other or with each other. And allegedly, there had been prior concerns or allegations about one of these stepbrothers and his behavior towards Anna. Now, again, we don't know the full details of these allegations. We don't know how serious they were, how the family handled them, or whether they were substantiated. But here's what we do know. Anna ended up dead in a cabin she shared with that stepbrother. And that forces us to ask, should cruise lines have any policy, any safeguards that take this into account, the unique dynamics of blended families when it comes to cabin assignments? Not to judge those families, not to shame them, but to and not to imply that blended families are inherently problematic. That's not what I'm saying. But to acknowledge that step siblings, particularly opposite sex step siblings who haven't grown up together, may have different comfort levels and boundaries than biological siblings do. So I got some research here, and we did a great show yesterday with Denise Schoenwald. Even discussed it a little bit with Siobhan Scott in an earlier show. But here's the reality that family therapists and child safety experts will tell you. Blended families, especially newly blended families, because this family's been only newly blended for about a year, can carry dynamics that biologic families don't. Boundaries may be less established. When kids grow up together from birth, they develop ingrained boundaries about privacy, personal space, and what's appropriate. Step siblings who meet as teenagers don't have that same foundation. There can be resentment or competition. New family structures can create jealousy, rivalry, or discomfort that wouldn't exist between biological siblings. And people are throwing jealousy in my comments. Maybe that is a possible motive. Obviously, some push sexual aggression, but some people also push jealousy. In rare but real cases, there is heightened risk of sexual or physical harm. Research shows that the risk of abuse between step siblings is statistically higher than between biological siblings. Not because most step siblings are dangerous, but because the protective factors that exist in biological families, early bonding, shared history, strong incest taboo, may be weaker or absent. Again, this doesn't mean blended families are bad or that step siblings can't share rooms safely. Most do. But it does mean that treating all sibling relationships as identical, regardless of whether they're biological or blended, they miss important nuances. I guess that's what we're trying to get at. So what's the current policy gap? So right now, Carnival's booking system doesn't differentiate. It doesn't ask, are these biological siblings or step siblings? It doesn't flag, these are opposite sex teens in a blended family. Should we check in? It doesn't create a pause for, has everyone consented to this arrangement and feels comfortable? The system sees names, ages, same family reservation, adult guardian with 3 cabins, check, cabin assigned. But what if there's discomfort? What if there's history? What if one person in that cabin feels unsafe but doesn't know how to speak? The system has no way of catching that. So how do you find a balance, right? Respect versus protection. That's always a balance. So here's the challenge for policymakers. How do you create a safeguard that might catch dangerous situations without making every blended family feel like they're being accused of something? How do you respect the fact that most families know what works for them while still creating an opportunity for someone to say, actually, I'm not comfortable with this? And I don't think the answer is a ban. I don't think it's intrusive questioning or forced separation, but I do think there could be a simple, respectful checkpoint. For example, when the booking system detects certain factors, opposite sex minors, step siblings relationships indicated in the passenger manifest, teens over a certain age, it could simply prompt, we see you book mixed gender teens in the same cabin. We want to make sure everyone's comfortable with this arrangement. If anyone would prefer separate cabins, we're happy to accommodate that. Would you like to discuss options? That's it. No accusations, no judgment, just an invitation. Most families would say, nope, we're fine, thanks, and move on. And that's a great liability checkpoint also for the cruise line. if they want to introduce some level of ownership, but also not take away from the ownership of the family and the people who understand that dynamic the best. But the families where someone is uncomfortable, where there's been tension, where a parent didn't fully think through the implications, that question creates a single moment where someone could speak up and potentially prevent a tragedy. So it invites that to happen. So if Anna ever brought it to someone's attention, that's a question that would be a good question to ask. And then maybe we'd have a different situation. So the question I want to ask here is, how do you find that balance? How do companies create policies that acknowledge heightened risk factors like mixed gender teens and blended families without making families feel judged, intruded upon, or as if they're being accused of something? What's the language or approach that opens the door to safety without triggering defensiveness? So the good thing about this is when there's an incident, they could always reflect on the incident. Because of what just happened, we have implemented these measures, and they could be, they could let the public know that these measures are because of something that happened that people felt could have been prevented. So we're not doing this because of judgment, but rather we're doing this because we don't want something like this happen again. It could be part of a legacy for Anna Kepner. Because of this failure somewhere, the cruise, which it didn't have to, has put in some measures as a safeguard, but ultimately the decision is really on the family. But there's an added filter, and this should help families, or it's meant to assist families just to ensure that everybody feels safe in where they are at. Now, I know I put mixed genders. I mean, technically, you could have same gender concerns. So I think we can open it up a little bit more broader as well. I just got to thinking of that. But with that said, I was focused more on Anna, but I love your thoughts on that. I mean, it could be just more open and not just for mixed genders. So let's see. So this leads us to another potential policy intervention, one that could work at the booking stage before anyone even steps on the ship. What if there was a simple, private, non-invasive question built into the check-in process that gave families the chance to flag concerns? Would people actually use it? And how would you design it so people feel safe being honest? Because again, two boys could feel uncomfortable with each other. But again, just in this case here, I think the initial red flag, because remember, you're stepping into a family's life when you may ask a certain question like that. So I think if you lean on the fact that they're mixed gender, it does, okay, do we want these teenagers to be together when, right, those proper boundaries really haven't been instilled because it's a new relationship that I'm having with, my spouse. It's a blended family. So one of the ideas that's been proposed in the wake of Anna's death is adding a very simple question to the online check-in process, something that would give families an opportunity to flag safety or comfort concerns before they ever board the ship. Here's what it might look like. During the final check-in process, when you're uploading passport photos, reviewing dining times, selecting excursions, imagine a screen that says cabin safety and comfort checks. We want to ensure everyone in your party feels safe and comfortable during your cruise. Do you have any concerns about the people sharing a cabin, or would anyone prefer alternative sleeping arrangements? Yes, no. I'd like to discuss privately. So now, guys, this encompasses not just mixed gender, but a wider selection. That's it. One question, optional, private. If you click no, you move on. The family boards, nothing changes. But if you click yes, or I'd like to discuss privately, it triggers a confidential follow-up email or phone call from guest services, an offer to modify cabin arrangements at minimal or no cost, and a notation in the system so that once aboard, crew are aware there was a flag concern. So if anything, you got the notation in the system that shows that there could be a flag concern. Now let me immediately address the obvious limitations. Would this actually work? Well, it relies on honesty. So if a family is in deep denial about dysfunction, which we can see here, if there's a coercion or control happening, if a parent is minimizing concerns because they don't want to admit their family isn't perfect, they might still click no and move on. And you can't force people to acknowledge problems they're not ready to face. But again, that's on the family now, sadly. It's not on the cruise line. Limitation 2 is it doesn't catch everything. Some situations escalate suddenly. Some families generally don't anticipate that a problem will arise. And some young people don't feel safe speaking up even when given the opportunity. So there's no single question that's a magic bullet here. And then you have the implementation challenge. What happens when someone does flag a concern? Who handles that follow-up? How quickly can cabins be reassigned? What if the cruise is fully booked? What if parents disagree about whether there's a problem? I mean, this requires operational follow-through, not just a checkbox on a screen. But here's why it's still worth doing, because nothing's perfect here. Even if this question only works 30% of the time, even if only a third of the families who should flag a concern actually do, there's still young people being moved out of potentially dangerous situations who otherwise wouldn't have been. Right now, there's zero opportunity. There's no question. There's no invitation. The booking system assumes that if you put people in a cabin together, you've thought it through and it's fine. But what if you haven't? What if doubt creeps in closer to the departure date? What if a teenager says to their parents, I really don't want to share a room with him? Right now, that conversation has nowhere official to go. The parent might accommodate it, or they might dismiss it, minimize it, or tell the teen stop being dramatic. And we talked about that yesterday with Denise. But if there's an official question from Carnival that opens the door that says, we take this seriously and we're willing to help, that changes the dynamic. That gives the concerned person, whether it's a parent or the young person themselves, official permission to raise the issue. So the wording matters enormously. If you phrase the question in a way that feels accusatory, invasive, or judgmental, people will shut down. They'll click no, reflexively, even if they shouldn't. Bad wording. Are there any dangerous or violent individuals in your party? That sounds like you're accusing them of bringing a criminal on vacation, and nobody's checking that box. Better wording. Sometimes family members have different comfort levels about sharing close quarters, especially during a week-long cruise. If anyone in your party would feel more comfortable with adjusted cabin arrangements, we're here to help. This is completely confidential, and there's no judgment. We just want everyone to have a safe, enjoyable experience. Do you have any concerns or preferences you'd like to discuss? That's non-judgmental. It normalizes the concern. It makes it sound like a reasonable thing that lots of people might need. It emphasizes confidentiality and support rather than investigation and consequences. And that kind of wording makes people feel safe being honest. Now, granted, there could be many people that bastardize the system, use it for their own advantage. And obviously, there'll be fail-safes for that, to ensure that it's not becoming a thing where people just pick and choose their rooms, but rather it's utilized for safety precautions. But with that said, it's a starting point. It's not perfect, but it's a starting point. A lot of us could just say no before we even get started, but maybe sometimes you should roll something in motion and fix it as it goes, as opposed to never going. Sometimes waiting for perfection is just a reason to hesitate when it's like, just roll it out, and we'll figure it out. Because you're never going to have a perfect plan. Every plan can come up with 20 doubts, but if you get it moving, you can figure it out along the way. Because it's just not perfect, but it's something maybe we could start pushing forward and fix it as it comes. So who should be able to answer this question? Here's another critical design choice. Is this question answered only by the person who booked the cruise, usually a parent, or can individual passengers in the party access and respond privately? Because if Anna Kepner was 18, legally an adult, and felt uncomfortable sharing a cabin with her stepbrothers, should she have been able to privately request a different arrangement without her parents' permission? I think the answer is yes. The booking system should allow any passenger 18 or older, and arguably even minors 16 to 17, confidentially indicate a cabin safety concern and request assistance. That way, even if parents are minimizing or dismissive, the young person themselves has a direct line to help. But again, you have to figure out there's a balance here. So this is a start. It's not perfect. And we may have more questions on how to make this work, but it's a starting ground. So I know a lot of people may see concerns in this, but let's note the concerns and see if there's workarounds. Do you think, again, so a question for us right now is, do you think families would actually use a question like this? And more importantly, what kind of wording, framing, or presentation would make them, or particularly the young people themselves, more likely to be honest rather than defensive, ashamed, or worried about causing family conflict? And I think it is questions based that don't fall centered on judgment, but rather assistance. I think assistance is key. So again, all that assumes we're catching concerns before the cruise even begins. But what about the young person who gets on the ship and realizes I'm not okay, I don't feel safe, I need help right now? That's where the next critical policy gap exists. And to me, it's the most important one. So if I could wave a magic wand and implement one policy change across the entire cruise industry tomorrow, it would be this. Every cruise ship needs a clear, simple, widely known procedure that any passenger, especially any minor, can use if they don't feel safe in their cabin. Right now, that doesn't appear to exist in any robust or standardized way. And when I say clear procedure, I don't mean, well, I guess you go talk to your guest services or maybe security or possibly your cabin steward if you can find them. I mean a specific, named, trained on protocol that every single crew member knows and that every passenger is told about during the mandatory safety training. When you're on a plane, they point to the exits. They tell you exactly what you got to do in case of emergency, like that. They talk you through. Maybe they announce it on the PA speaker. Let me walk you through what that could look like and why it matters so much. So the current reality is there's no clear path to help. Imagine you're a teenager on a cruise ship. You're in a cabin with someone who makes you uncomfortable. Maybe they made inappropriate comments. Maybe they violated your privacy. Maybe you're just scared and you just can't articulate exactly why, but your gut is telling you something is wrong. What do? You go to get services, but that's a public desk in the middle of the atrium where everyone can see you and hear you. Do you call security? But what's the number? And what will they do? Will they believe you? Will they just tell your parents and then you're stuck back in that cabin with someone who now knows you reported them? Or do you find your cabin steward, but they're busy, they might not speak English fluently, and they might not be trained to handle this kind of situation? And the uncertainty alone is enough to keep someone silent, because if you don't know what will happen when you speak up, if you're afraid you won't be believed or that it will make things worse or that you'll be dismissed as dramatic, you'll probably stay quiet and try to manage it yourself. So it's not the problem of reporting it, but rather what happens after you report it. That's always key. That's why a lot of people may not say their concerns, because they don't feel at some point there's an integrity with the concern, how it's handled, or there's a reaction that still keeps them safe. So, and sometimes trying to manage it yourself gets you killed. So what would real cabin safety protocol look like? Here's what I thought should exist. A name-specific protocol. Call it cabin safety request, safe space protocol, or passenger welfare check. I don't really care what the name is. But it needs a name that crew can reference and passengers can ask for. I need to make a cabin safety request. Should be a phrase that instantly triggers a known response from any crew member. And guys, if someone's going to say, well, that could easily be misused, figure it out. Because we can come up with a bunch of excuses for it not to happen, when rather we should just let it roll and see how we have to adjust. So there's multiple access points. A young person should be able to report this concern through guest services, security with a dedicated hotline, any crew member in uniform, the ship's medical center, a text-based system or app, or even anonymous drop boxes if necessary. The more pathways to help, the more likely someone will use one. Immediate response, we'll look into it, so you do want an immediate response. The protocol should mandate immediate temporary relocation. If someone says, I don't feel safe sleeping in my cabin tonight, the default response is, okay, we're moving you right now. Let's get you somewhere safe, and then we'll figure out the next step. There's no interrogation required. You don't need to prove you're in danger. You don't need to provide evidence. Your stated discomfort is enough to trigger protective action. And documentation. Every report is logged, timestamped, and tracked. This protects both the passenger and the cruise line. Now, again, it could be misused. You're going to have states of paranoia, but we have to sometimes adapt and adjust. We can't get so held back by the what ifs that we don't do anything. There's always going to be a what if. You can't wait for perfection. I think sometimes that's a lot of the concerns that happen when you have a good plan. Everybody's more concerned about, all these points where it can go bad, but it's needed. Sometimes you have to adapt and adjust in the moment, because then you wind up never doing anything. You paralyze yourself. And then there's confidentiality protection. That's huge. The young person gets to decide whether and how parents or other family members are notified. If you're 18, you're an adult. Carnival shouldn't automatically tell your parents. If you're 16 and you're afraid of the person in your cabin, having crew immediately call your parents, who might minimize, dismiss, or force you back into that cabin, could make things worse. So the protocol needs to protect the reporter from retaliation or coercion. And then there's staff training repeatedly and seriously. Every crew member who interacts with passengers should be trained on how to recognize signs of distress in minors, what's the exact procedure is for a cabin safety concern, why is it critical to take every report seriously, even if it seems minor, and how to respond compassionately and non-judgmentally. And this training can't be a one-time video during onboarding. It needs to be reinforced regularly through refreshers, drills, and scenario-based practice, because in a crisis, people default to their training. If they're not trained, they improvise. And that's when you see mistakes happen. So why could this save lives? Think about what this protocol does psychologically. It tells young people you don't have to figure this out alone. You don't have to decide if it's bad enough to report. You don't have to be afraid of not being believed. And there's a system designed specifically to help you, and all you have to do is say the words. That's incredibly powerful. Because right now, so many young people in uncomfortable or dangerous situations stay silent because they don't know if anyone will help them. They don't want to make a big deal out of it, and they don't want to ruin the family vacation. They convince themselves it'll be fine. A clear, accessible, non-judgmental protocol removes all those barriers. It says your safety matters more than convenience, more than family harmony, more than anything. If you're scared, we will help you. So there's a question I want to pose your way. How powerful could it be psychologically for a young person to know there is a specific named procedure for saying, I don't feel safe in my cabin? Something that's not vague or improvised, but official and trained on. I mean, could that have made the difference here for her? Would that make them more likely to speak up? Would that have made her more likely to speak up? And on the flip side, what happens to a young person's willingness to report when they sense that staff aren't taking them seriously or just trying to smooth things over? How do we know that when she got on the cruise, she wound up not saying nothing because she was at a point where nobody was taking her seriously? We don't know that. I'm just saying, but how do we know? So how do you know that these just don't eventually become accepted situations where I guess I have to? And now they just accept because they can't escape. So that brings us to one of the most overlooked, unglamorous, but absolutely critical aspects of this entire conversation. You can write the most beautiful policy in the world, but if nobody follows it, it's worthless. I work in corrections, so you got to have buy-in, and you got to translate buy-in. You can't just push policy down, especially reactionary policy, and expect people to follow it. You have to create buy-in. Buy-in has to be translated. You have to get people involved in how it's to be carried out. So you bring all the people that have to carry it out and you ask them, what would be the best way to do this if we decide to implement it? So they could take ownership. And that's where you get the buy-in. People don't like policies that are pushed down very reactionary. So you have to be somewhere pushing proper momentum by allowing them to figure out how this will work out so they could be take ownership in how it's applied. And then that buy-in can translate into more effectiveness and more willingness to carry it out. So let's talk about compliance and why it's so hard to get it right. So here's an uncomfortable truth about safety policies in any industry. Most failures don't happen because there's no policy. They happen because the policy exists, but they're not being followed. Someone didn't know about it. Someone didn't understand it. Someone thought it didn't apply. Someone was too busy. Someone made judgment call and got it wrong. That gap between what's written in the handbook and what actually happens in real time is where people get hurt. I know this very well. And in the cruise industry, that gap can be especially wide because you're dealing with international crews from dozens of countries, high turnover rates, language barriers, thousands of passengers and hundreds of crew operating simultaneously, and pressure to keep things running smoothly and avoid escalations. So even if Carnival implements every policy change we discussed tonight, the pre-cruise safety check, the mixed gender cabin awareness, the formal I don't feel safe protocol, we still have to ask, how do we ensure crew members actually follow it when it matters? So why is compliance so hard? It's information overload. Crew members already managing dozens of policy, procedures, safety protocols, and operational requirements. Adding more policy doesn't automatically mean they'll be prioritized or remembered. I'm sure we all deal with this in our workplace. If the cabin safety concern protocol is policy number 47 in a 200-page manual, it's going to get lost. It has to be prominent, repeated, reinforced constantly. It's also not just a family fight problem. One of the biggest obstacles to compliance is crew members making judgment calls that minimize risk. Imagine a teenage girl approaches the guest service desk and says, I don't feel comfortable in my cabin. Crew member sees she's with family. She's not visibly injured. There's no screaming or obvious emergency. It's the middle of busy embarkation day. So the crew member thinks, oh, they probably just had an argument. Family's bicker on vacation. I'm not going to escalate this and create a whole thing over nothing. And that judgment call could cost someone their life because what looks like just family fight from the outside might actually be an escalating pattern of intimidation, coercion, or abuse that's been building for months. Staff have to be trained to understand. You don't get to decide if it's serious enough. If someone says they don't feel safe, you act, and that's it, period. Now, it's funny because people are like, man, this is a lot for a cruise, but you take on that responsibility when you decide to house families because the secrets that happen in their home are now being brought into the cruise ship. Think about it. The secrets that happen in their home are now being brought into the cruise ship. All right, so fear of overstepping or offending guests. So cruise lines make money by keeping passengers happy. Crew members are trained to be accommodating, friendly, and solution-oriented. But what happens when the solution is potentially creating conflict within a family? What if moving a teenager out of a cabin angers the parent? What if they complain? What if they demand a refund or threaten to leave a bad review? Some crew members might hesitate to act because they're worried about upsetting paying customers. Policy has to explicitly protect crew from retaliation for following safety protocols. It has to make clear your job is to protect passengers, not to keep everyone happy. Oof. Oof. So how to monitor and enforce compliance? So how do you actually ensure that policies get followed? So you have to have your regular scenario-based training. And I know, guys, this sounds like a lot, but as I said, you overreact, and then you find what works and what doesn't work. So not just videos, not just reading manuals, actual practice. Crew members should regularly participate in scenario-based drills where they have to respond to situations like a 17-year-old approaches and says she doesn't want to sleep in her cabin. A cabin steward notices a passenger who seems withdrawn or fearful. A parent calls saying their teen is overreacting to a cabin concern. They'll need to practice the actual words. They'll say the actual, they need to practice the actual words they'll say, the actual steps they'll take, so that when it happens for real, it's automatic. I mean, guys, think about it, the privacy of a cabin. Again, just to reiterate, if there's concerns happening at home, sexual abuse, and the big thing about that concern is that no one says anything, it's a secret. Once you bring that dynamic into the cabin, you know, we have to, it become that, I think at that point, that could become our responsibility. We need to give them outlets. Maybe this would be the safest way they can report it. And maybe they're waiting to get on that cabin and to tell the truth. But again, the secrets that happen at home, they can easily happen at hotels, on cruise ships. They need to practice. Okay, so mystery shoppers and compliance audits. Periodically, Carnival should have someone pose as a passenger with a cabin safety concern and see how crew respond. Do they know the protocols? Do they follow it correctly? Do they take it seriously or dismiss it? How long does it take to get help? These audits shouldn't be about catching people and punishing them. They should be about identifying where training gaps exist and fixing them. So simulated codes are really meant for corrective measures, not to say fault, because if you're going to quickly discipline the failure of a simulated code, then people won't be honest with you. But if they know it's a learning process, then you really start to get at what needs to be fixed, and it becomes a team effort. Then you got the incident log reviews. Every report of a cabin safety concern, even ones that turn out to be minor, should be logged and periodically reviewed by shoreside management. Look for patterns. Are certain crew members handling these well? Are others consistently mishandling them? Are there ships where reports are being made and others where there are suspiciously zero reports, which might mean passengers don't feel safe reporting, not that nothing happens? And it's funny, I see that in prison too. You get units where you get a rookie and you're expecting them to be challenged, so you expect them to write a lot of reports because the inmates are going to challenge them, and then one day you find out like there's a rookie there and he hasn't written one charge. It's like, well, I know from experience they're going to challenge you. You're managing 100-something of them, so you have to go back and check, hey, there's something happening here, you know, because I'm expecting charges because you're new. They test boundaries. So again, the goal, let me see, hold on. So, okay, post-incident analysis. When something does go wrong, when there's a serious incident that policy should have caught, do a thorough, no blame analysis. What information was available, who should have acted and didn't, what systemic factors led to the policy not being followed, and what training or process changes would prevent recurrences. The goal isn't punishment, it's learning. And then you have clear accountability and protection. And accountability comes when you have clear ownership. That's why you got to get that buy-in. So crew members need to know if you follow the safety protocols, you're protected, even if parents complain, even if it turns out to be a false alarm, even if it creates inconvenience. But if you don't follow the protocol when you should have, there are consequences. That accountability has to be real, consistent, and enforced from the top down. The culture question. Ultimately, compliance isn't just about rules and monitoring. It's about culture. Culture of the workplace. Does Carnival culture generally prioritize passenger safety over operational convenience? When a crew member has to choose between following a safety protocol that might create complications and just smoothing things over to keep the day running smoothly, which choice does the company culture reward? Because if crew members learn through experience that raising concerns gets them in trouble, creates extra work, or is seen as being overly cautious, they'll stop raising concerns. But if the culture consistently reinforces, when in doubt, protect the passenger, we'd rather investigate 100 false alarms than miss one real danger, that's when compliance becomes natural. So again, a question for you guys. In your experience, whether in healthcare, hospitality, education, or any field where safety protocols matter, what are the biggest obstacles that prevent staff from actually following procedure in real time? Is it lack of training, lack of belief that it matters, or fear of consequences? I go with the third one, fear of consequences. That's why a lot of things gets pushed under the rug. I know what to do is right, but I don't want to get in trouble. So I go into self-survival mode. And then you think you're running a good thing. And then all of a sudden you lift up the rug. And it's like, holy shit, what happened here? That's because you're running a ship that's strictly by discipline. So people don't bring up the concerns and you think it's perfect when it's not. And what makes the difference between organizations where policies are followed consistently and those where they just words on paper? You get buy-in. But that means that if you say what the what is, you push down the how, and you allow your front line to understand the why behind the work. That's very important. Why this is being done. Guys, if I was a worker and I knew that this is about safety, I could find purpose in that. So give me that why, and I'll take onus of that. That's a good purpose-driven policy. You're protecting people. So if a worker can't find purpose in that, then maybe they really should be working on the ship. So, and all this brings us back to the fundamental tension we've been navigating through tonight's conversation. So cruise lines can't rewrite family history. They can't fix dysfunction that's been building for years, and they can't control every choice a parent makes. But they can raise the floor of protection. They can build systems that catch warning signs. They can give young people pathways to safety that don't currently exist. So let's bring this home. Let's talk about what's realistic, what's necessary, and what Anna's death should teach us. All right, so as we near the end of tonight's conversation, I want to come back to a truth we acknowledged at the beginning, one that's uncomfortable but essential to hold on to. No cruise line can fully prevent every tragedy that emerges from complex family dysfunction, hidden abuse, or dynamics that have been building for years. Carnival isn't conducting home studies before family books cruises. They're not running background checks on every passenger. They're not equipped to identify and intervene in every troubled family relationship. And we can't reasonably expect them to be. So let's just put that out there, because I don't want people to think that's what this was about. They're on vacation, and they're a vacation company, not a child protective service agency. They serve millions of passengers every year, and the overwhelming majority have perfectly safe, enjoyable experiences. But, and this is critical, acknowledging that limitations doesn't mean accepting the status quo. Because while cruise lines can't control everything, they can control a lot more than they currently do. They can raise the baseline of protection, they can close obvious gaps, and they can create systems that make it easier for people in danger to get help. So what does raising the floor actually mean? It means you're not trying to guarantee that nothing bad will ever happen, because that's impossible. But you're making it significantly harder for preventable tragedies to slip through the cracks, and we all believe that this could have been a preventable tragedy. Think of it like this: building codes for houses. Building codes don't guarantee your house will never catch fire, but they require smoke detectors, fire-resistant material, proper wiring, sprinkler systems in certain buildings. They raise the floor of safety. They reduce the likelihood of preventable deaths. And that's what we're talking about here. So the concrete changes we discussed, let's recap what's a more protective system could look like. Pre-cruise safety screening, a simple non-invasive question during online check-ins. Do you have any safety or comfort concerns about cabin arrangements? We're here to help if anyone would prefer adjustments. Cost to implement should be minimal. This is a software update. Operational impact, low for most bookings. Only triggers follow-up for the small percentage who flag concerns. Potential benefit, could identify and address concerning situations before anyone boards. I know I said mixed gender, blended family awareness, but if you guys believe this should be generally applied, a little bit bigger, a little bit broader applied. But when I did this, it was more about the mixed gender. But, you know, again, it's not always mixed gender or not always blended family. But this was the starting point, because this is based off of what happened here. When booking systems detect opposite sex teens, especially step siblings, a respectful prompt: we see you book mixed gender teens together. We want to ensure everyone's comfortable. Would you like to discuss cabin options? Cost minimal, another booking system flag. Impact gives family a moment to reconsider arrangements that might seem fine on paper but could be problematic. And the benefit creates an invitation for families who might not have fully thought through the implication. At that point, I was looking to save money, had to book the cruise. But now later, if there's this option, well, and it doesn't cost us anything, then maybe we could look at this. And then number 3, clear: I don't feel safe in my cabin protocols. That's a clear name, label, something, whatever you want to label it, but something that people they know exists. A name trained on procedure that every passenger learns about during safety briefings. Every crew member knows how to execute, triggers immediate protective action. Cost moderate, requires training, system updates, operational procedures. Impact requires crew buy-in and consistent enforcement. Benefits give vulnerable passengers a clear, accessible pathway to safety that doesn't exist now. and enhanced staff training, regular scenario-based training on recognizing signs of distress in minors, understanding blended families and step-sibling dynamics, responding to cabin safety concerns without judgment, and documentation and escalation procedures. Cost moderate, requires dedicated training time and resources. Impact changes crew culture around passenger welfare. You got to keep that momentum going, by the way. Don't let that die out. Fuel that momentum. Benefit ensures policies are actually followed in real-world situations. And then you have the compliance monitoring, regular audits, mystery shoppers, incident reviews to ensure policies are being followed. Cost, that's ongoing operational expense. Impact requires management commitment. Benefits closes the gap between written policy and actual practice. And none of these are unreasonable. These aren't radical, impossible demands. They're reasonable, implementable safety enhancements that respect family autonomy, don't create massive operational burdens, don't assume all families are dangerous, and don't turn cruise ships into surveillance states. Don't turn cruise ships into surveillance states. They simply create more opportunities for people to speak up, more checkpoints where concerns can be identified, and clearer pathways to help. And the liability argument, and frankly, from a purely business perspective, Carnival should want these policies because the next time something like Anna case happens, and statistically millions of passengers annually, it probably will, the question will be, what did you do after Anna Kepner to prevent this? Ain't that the question? Because it got national news. So her name will be something that they put in as a reactive, but ultimately a preventive measure. Because people will say, guys, Anna Kepner, remember that case? How could this happen again? And if the answer is nothing, or we issued a statement and moved on, the liability exposure is massive because now it becomes negligence because you may have always thought that it could happen. Well, now it did. And what do we do now? But if the answer is we implemented comprehensive cabin safety protocols, enhanced our booking screening, created clear pathways for passengers to report concerns, and trained all crew on recognizing and responding to interpersonal risk, that's a very different legal position. That's a company that took reasonable steps to address a known risk. And I'm very in tune with this because I work in corrections. If something happens, you have to assume that can happen at your facility. You have to get in play because people expect you to be aware of these things. The higher up you go, you must be aware. It's very hard for you to say that this did not hit in your radar. And once you're aware, you can't unsee it. Would these changes have saved Anna? Here's the honest answer. I don't know. I really don't know. Maybe your family would have minimized concerns in the booking process. Maybe Anna wouldn't have felt safe reporting discomfort. Maybe the circumstances were such that no policy would have changed. No policy would have caught it in time. But maybe, just maybe, one of these interventions would have created a moment where a parent reconsidered the cabin arrangement. Anna found a crew member who took her concern seriously. A guest service agent offered alternative accommodations, or someone noticed warning signs and acted on them. And if there's even a 20% chance that better policies could have saved her life, isn't it worth implementing? Could have saved her life. Because the next Anna Kepner might be boarding a cruise ship right now. And the question is, will the system be any better equipped to protect her than it was to protect Anna? Final question for you guys. When you look at everything we've discussed tonight, the policy gaps, the implementation challenges, the balance between family autonomy and protection, if you could mandate one concrete change that cruise lines must implement immediately to better protect vulnerable young people, what would it be? What's the single most important intervention? And for me, it has to be centered around some level of awareness. How do we bring about a procedure that allows people to feel safe when they want to make you aware of something that could make them extremely, extremely vulnerable? Because your job is to protect the vulnerable. Closing thoughts. And guys, feel free to share this. That would be great. Maybe do a cruise line. Maybe one day I can get a guest from a cruise line on. Help me with that. That would be great. Someone in higher management, because I would love to discuss this. Keep this going until we know change is headed in the right direction. And then maybe at that point we can move on, because that will definitely be a big part of justice for Anna. Protect the future Annas. So Anna Kepner should be alive right now. She should be starting college or working her first job or figuring out what she wants to do with her life. All the things 18-year-olds are supposed to be doing. She'd be in the military maybe, somewhere scuba diving. Instead, she's dead, killed in a cruise cabin during what should have been a family vacation, and we can't bring her back. No policy change, no enhanced protocol, no training program will undo what happened to her. Let's get her on screen. But we can make sure her death means something. We can use this tragedy as a catalyst for real, meaningful change in how the cruise industry thinks about passenger safety, particularly when it comes to minors and complex family situations. Because here's what we've established tonight. Carnival's current policies are designed primarily to manage public behavior, curfews, conduct codes, supervision, and shared spaces. They're not designed to identify or respond to interpersonal risk that's inside cabins, behind closed doors, where dynamics can be dangerous but invisible. There are no meaningful checkpoints in the booking process where families can flag concerns or where the system pauses to consider whether a particular cabin arrangement might be problematic. And there's no clear accessible protocol for a young person who feels unsafe in their cabin. No obvious place to go, no guaranteed response, no confidence that speaking up will actually help rather than make things work. And even when good policies exist, compliance is inconsistent because crew members aren't adequately trained, aren't empowered to act, or aren't held accountable when they fail to follow procedure. These are fixable problems. They don't require revolutionary change. They don't require cruise lines to become social workers or investigators. They don't require trampling on family privacy or autonomy. They simply require acknowledging that the current system has blind spots and building in safeguards to address them. So what happens next? Carnival's almost certainly having internal conversations right now about this case. Their legal team is involved. Their risk management people are reviewing protocols. Their executives are asking what's our exposure here? What do we need to change? And that's where public pressure matters, because companies don't make expensive operational changes out of the goodness of their hearts. They make them where there's legal liability at stake, there's reputational risk, there's public demand, and there's regulatory pressure. If we as consumers, as parents, as people who care about child safety, make it clear that we expect more, that we won't accept thoughts and prayers followed by business as usual, change will happen. And families start asking questions before booking. What's your protocol if my teen doesn't feel safe in their cabin? How do you handle mixed gender minors and blended families? Get a little specific there if you feel that should be brought up. What training does your crew receive on recognizing signs of distress? If those questions get asked enough, cruise lines will develop better answers. But there's also a message to the families. If you're planning a cruise with a blended family, with step siblings, with any kind of complex dynamic, talk about cabin arrangements openly. Don't assume everyone's comfortable just because no one's objecting. Don't dismiss a teenager's discomfort as drama or oversensitivity. And don't prioritize convenience or cost savings over genuine comfort and safety. And make sure every young person in your party knows if you feel unsafe, you can and should speak up. Find a crew member, find guest services, find anyone in authority and say, I need help. You deserve to be protected, even on vacation, even within your own family. Message to the cruise industry. You serve millions of families every year. Most have wonderful experiences, but most isn't good enough when we're talking about the safety of children and young adults. Anna Kepner's death should be a wake-up call. Not because you're villains and not because cruising is inherently dangerous, but because the system you have in place weren't designed for the reality of modern families that are blended, complicated, sometimes dysfunctional, and sometimes dangerous. You can do better, and you should want to. Because the next time this happens, and statistically it will, the question won't be whether you could have predicted this specific case. Question will be whether you built a system capable of catching cases like this generally. And if the answer is no, if the answer is that you knew there were gaps and chose not to address it, no, that's going to be very hard to defend. So my final thought, because there was a lot here. I started tonight by saying that no cruise line can rewrite family history, and that's true. But they can raise the floor of protection. They can ask better questions. They can create clearer pathways to safety. They can train their people to recognize and respond to warning signs. They can build systems that acknowledge reality, and not every family is safe. And young people deserve options when they're not safe. And that's not too much to ask. And if Anna's death leads to those changes, if the next vulnerable teenager on a cruise ship has access to help that Anna didn't have, then something good will have come from this unimaginable tragedy. So thank you for watching tonight. This has been a difficult but necessary conversation. If anything we've discussed has raised concerns for you or someone you know, resources are available. And if you have thoughts on what cruise lines should do differently, if you had experiences that relate to what we talked about tonight, I want to hear from you. Put that in the comments. Because change happens when people refuse to accept what tragedies like this. Sorry, let me just put a picture up. Because change happens when people refuse to accept that tragedies like this are inevitable. Anna Kepner deserved better, and so does every young person who boards a cruise ship after her. All right, guys. Guys, if you like the content, please feel free to get me a cup of coffee. Keep it in the description, a link, or on top of the YouTube channel. As always, guys, stay safe. This was a question you asked. I hope it provides some level of answers that we can move forward with, gain momentum. Even if you feel it's a bit of an overaction, it's a start. It's a start, and it's not a perfect dialogue. It's meant to be put up there so the conversation can happen. If you wait for perfection, the conversation never happens. So there's my conversation, flaws and all. There it is. Take it. Help me. Help me. Help me. I gave questions for us to answer. I never once claimed that what I gave you there is perfection because I'm learning in the process. I'm not even the one that, if they ever needed a class to be taught on crew safety, it wouldn't be me. I can't do it. I just thought I can get some questions, do some research, and put it out there, but I'm not the expert. But together, maybe we can put pressures on the experts. That's all. As always, guys, stay safe.